Alright, biting the bullet, we're doing it. Tired of putting it off? We're going to talk about Avatar for a good bit. This may not be the hot button topic to discuss right now with movies, but after seeing Way of Water for the first time relatively recently, actually, surprisingly, there's just a lot that I want to go through, and I'll be talking about both movies, mostly the second though, because that's really where my fascination for this whole topic came to mind. And not really a good one, for sure, but that's why I want to go over my impressions on the first movie for a bit. I'll be digging into Way of Water much more, so I wanted to talk about my experience with the movie back in 2009. And given that these movies have been out for quite some time, I think it's alright to have this be a full spoiler discussion. So, warning, spoilers. But first thing, hello, welcome everybody. Quite a bit's been going on since the past couple uploads. For one, we reached 50 subs, and now 60, and pushing to 70. Literally between the last video until now, I barely got the chance to celebrate 50, and now we're at 60. So at this pace, my goal of reaching 100 subs before the new year might actually be attainable, which is great. Awesome. I couldn't tell who's the 50th, but all you new subs, it means the world. Thank you. Welcome. I hope I can continue to provide better content. But that's it. Too much to go through to stop here. Thank you guys. Super happy I got to have my first 1,000 views for a video. And now second video. I really thought that Elden Ring video would have been a dud, but now it's like my highest viewed video. So all of you, thank you. Avatar, the first one, came out in 2009, and to say that it took the world by storm would be a massive understatement. It broke the box office, broke people's minds, and was such a significant leap in visual effects that it really made its mark, and to this day still holds the record for the highest grossing film of all time with a worldwide intake of over $2.9 billion. God, that is stupid money. That is an incomprehensible amount for a theater release. It's insane. It's one of those massive hits that, looking into behind the scenes, it's pretty funny in like a tragically ironic sort of way of hearing about like other actors who almost had roles in the movie but passed or weren't able to, like Matt Damon. But he's fine. He didn't need it. But just imagine living with, you know, the thought that you passed up literally the most financially successful movie of all time. What's even more insane is just how impactful it was, despite being such a, simple concept. We've seen this story before in other movies, you know the list, that's already a dead beaten horse. But what made this stand out over other similar concepts has nothing to do with its storytelling in my opinion, but in its world building. For a new IP at the time with such a bizarre concept in how Pandora operates with the Na'vi, this was a risky venture. But they doubled down with just an incredible amount of detail and care to make this alien planet feel like a genuine place that exists. And I highly encourage you to look into the behind the scenes featurettes for the first movie. It is overwhelming. But let's quickly review over the first movie. I mean, it's not the most riveting plot, but it's been like 14 years. I think a little refresher is warranted. So our main lead, Jake Sully, is a Marine who's filling in for his twin brother, taking part in the Avatar program on Pandora. Humans are looking to colonize it, or at the very least try to extract it for its incredible abundance of unobtainium. It's worth 20 million a kilo, which is ridiculous, but that's why they're there. And apparently that's its worth unrefined, but on Earth it's actually worth twice that much when refined, at least according to the wiki. Big corporation trying to impede on the locals for everything they've got. You know how this goes, because even if they got it, they probably aren't going to stop there. After getting situated, Jake is tasked with befriending the local populace in the hopes to understand their ways and eventually earn their trust fast enough to convince them to leave their home tree. And that tree is sitting on top of one of the biggest deposits of that mineral, because I'm not saying that again. And Jake begins to become emotionally involved with the tribe and his tour guide Neytiri. Then push comes to shove, and he does his best to convince the tribe to leave, which they don't. Humans come, burn the tree down, and then begin to hunt down the rest of the tribe. The Na'vi finally rally a force large enough to take the humans over, which naturally is an issue for the RDA. Big battle ensues. Jake and the Blue Man Group tribe win, and they transfer his consciousness permanently from his body to his avatar. And that's the movie. Was that a fair summary? No, not really. But that's the point. You watch this movie once and you get the flow of the story well enough that you get it. I'm not rewatching this for the plot. It's for the lore, or at least on Pandora's side, and its visuals. I honestly barely remember half of the characters' names before this review, which I think is pretty telling. But yes, if you've never seen Avatar, you very likely have seen similar movies like it before. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently, doing a story with a similar beat from other movies. If that's the story you want to tell, that's fine. But the challenge is in trying to find that new spin to it. What is it about this project that's going to set it apart from its predecessors? And for Avatar, the answer to that was the inverse. There's no big twist with the characters. You know exactly how this is going to go, and it goes there. But they took the chance to lean more on the spectacle and imaginative angle to this alien world. It's a popcorn movie. You're in the seats for the experience. You go in and you're looking to be taken out of the 9 to 5 for a couple hours and just bask in everything James Cameron and his team could come up with. I don't see how anyone could have felt cheated to that aspect to this movie. It delivers. Kind of reminds me of one of those drive-in zoos. You go from point A to B to see the sights and then you're gone. But at least we can have that at the safety and leisure of our living room and not fend for our lives out in Pandora. And also because it's not real. The story and the characters are what I find to be the weakest aspects to these Avatar movies. Everything surrounding it, the lore of the Na'vi culture and their religious beliefs, their connection to nature, that stuff I personally find to be the most compelling. And that's mostly why I like revisiting the first movie way more. It leans into the discovery and wonder of this specific environment of Pandora. And so going into Way of Water, that was my expectation going in. I don't think it was that high of a bar to set because naturally I assumed that was just a fundamental aspect for the world moving forward. If anything, I thought we would maybe move away from the first movie's cast, if not entirely, then just enough where they would be there to serve as some exposition dumps. In hindsight, I think Avatar 1 succeeded a little more in terms of its plot and characterization because it was following a familiar path. There was an established guideline with how the characters were going to behave and eventually end up. Avatar 2 doesn't have that. Now the training wheels are off and now it's going on its own path, which is why, in my humble opinion, the writing shows itself to be really, really lacking. Sorry if that seemed like such a piss poor take on the first movie, but honestly, I have very little to add on to that without beginning my comparisons and complaints with Way of Water. It's a solid 3 out of 5 stars for me. As someone who personally didn't connect with the story as much as maybe some people, if I were judging it on everything else except the visuals, it'd be bordering a significantly lower score, totally. For what it was aiming for, which was not really in the plot department but everything else, it excels. I watched it again for this review, mostly just for context, got it on 4K, and it still holds up, especially with that bump. It looks really, really nice. It's a little dated, kind of, in a way that it leans more into a CG cutscene from a video game, more so now than it did back then. But it's not a complaint. I still really enjoy just looking at this movie. This is one of the exceptionally rare cases of movies where I turn to, and I'm okay with turning my brain off and just letting it take me for a ride. I get up and get a snack during the exposition stuff with the humans, and then I'm glued to the screen when they're out in the jungle. And I don't feel like I really missed out on that much. Which, going into Way of Water, you'd think that'd be my biggest praise. There's barely any humans, almost everyone that's in focus is a Na'vi at this point, even the villains, but yes, I'm ready to sink my teeth into this. This was just really interesting. You guys are like, oh, how the fuck? It sounds like you really hate this movie, which I kind of do, but I'm just really intrigued with the decision making here when it came to pretty much everything. And this is a very important movie for the franchise because this is going to set the mark for how the movies are going to be moving forward for the next 5 or 7 more of these Cameron apparently has planned and already written, which that plan alone is also just really interesting because in a way I'm actually saddened by it. I mean, I'd love to see Cameron take on another project. The guy is the king of masses when it comes to making blockbusters. I think it'd be neat if he took on something in the fantasy genre. That'd be pretty epic. Imagine James Cameron's Dune, or the equivalent of it. That'd be a really cool step. So to change it up just a smidge, I'm going to do my best not to go through this movie per plot point, especially a movie of this length, and which is arguably pretty hollow in my opinion. I'm just going to go down my notes on the really big points with supporting details that I think captures most of my issues with Way of Water. Even if it's monotonous, we can't go very far without addressing the visuals. This is, without a doubt, probably the best digitally created special effects that I've ever seen. No footnote to that, this is as straightforward and honest of a takeaway that I could give you on something like this. This is phenomenal to look at, and of course, it's no surprise, but the segments where the movie takes a break from the plot to focus on the world through the visuals were my favorite moments. I'll touch up on that when I get to the pacing of this movie, but we're still on the positives. I've never seen water look so good and it being completely fake. I can't help but be taken back by how over 90% of this movie isn't real, and not using sets. And for some movies that's a big complaint, but in cases like this, they're taking the effort to really convince you that what you're watching is real to that world as it can be. They had me sold before the first 30 minutes. I can't imagine how much farther we can push CGI at this point, really. This honestly feels pretty close to the peak at this point. So that aspect alone is enough to make sure I don't miss the theater experience for the next release. Because I did this time, I just honestly wasn't up for it. Next and final positive, a mini segue from the special effects because that does lend its hand here, but I really enjoyed the action sequences towards the later half of the movie. Granted, the scope is not as grand compared to the third act of the first movie, but for this movie's setting, based mostly on family, quote unquote, having it be more on this small scale tribe versus Quaritch's squad, it makes sense. I wasn't disappointed that this didn't break into all out war by amassing all the other tribes again. Even if it would have looked awesome, I think that would have just been kind of derivative. But just because the scale is toned down, I didn't feel that took away from the quality of the set piece moments. Because even with that being the case, I actually enjoyed the action more in this movie than I did in the first. It's also different in the sense that this is more Na'vi combat oriented. With the villain revived as an avatar, we get to see not just Quaritch but his squad be on a similar level as Jake and the other tribe in terms of their physical abilities. Humans no longer have to solely rely on the mech suits, but now they have their own avatars that can interact with the environment, like Jake's been able to from before. Those bouts between Quaritch and Jake with their flying mounts / horses, mountain banshees, they're called mountain banshees. That's it? Really? I figured they'd have more of an exotic name than that. Anyways, their flying and water battle was a really great segment. That's actually a change I was hoping for before watching this movie, by taking advantage of the animals and surroundings more in combat like that. And I think they did a great job. The action was awesome, but I still wish I was more emotionally connected with the characters, because then that would have really added another great factor in me wanting to return for future viewings. That's all I got for positives. Alright, now we gotta go into the meat of this. Ow. And now, my first bitchy point I want to make here. Complaint, I'll put that in quotes. The period and time skipping coming off from the intro. I know that's literally the first plot beat of the movie, but just hang on a minute, because I think it's both an odd and debatably curious choice to have done a 14-year time skip. I get that it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek nod to the fact that it took the sequel 14 years to come out, and also that the year that Avatar 1 takes place in world was the same year that the movie came out. Anyway, you get it. That's kind of cute. And if the rest of the movie managed to feel like that time skip was justified for me, then that would have been fine. For comparison, I just finished binging The Last of Us games. That's why this video is late, and in the show too, and the second game. And that there's like a 20-year time skip, and then 5-year or 4-year in the sequel, but the rest of the writing is like really strong, so that those skips to me feel really integral to its story. In my opinion, Way of Water, however, I didn't feel that way, and I'll tell you why. And that's because of the major downgrade in terms of time and character development between the protagonists of the first movie, Jake and his wife Neytiri. Now, my Jake is not the most compelling character. He's not even the slightest bit compelling, really. He served as our fish out of water vehicle by experiencing this world for the first time, just as much as we were. His arc goes from being this jarhead gung-ho who follows orders into becoming one of the Omaticaya people. And for as lackluster as a character that Jake Sully is, that arc makes sense for his role at that time, and I think the transition felt justified in how that was presented. Now, in Way of Water, presumably, we think his next arc would be in learning to be a father, just based from what Cameron told us what this franchise is going to be about. So, at certain points of this movie, that's definitely the case. I'm not denying that there's any attempt to develop that. However, between his firstborn having 2 other kids, along with adopting 2 more kids, that's a hell of a lot to dump onto one guy between 15 years, you know? And that's really a movie's worth of content you could work with there. And I'm imagining the different ways they could have done this, but I'm not gonna dump a bunch of alternative fan fiction on you guys. But the point is, that big of a time skip, I feel, is a really rocky foundation for this sequel as a setup, especially on the point of it skipping over the developing bonds between Jake or even Neytiri and all of their kids. Because to me, Way of Water from Jake's perspective, this feels like a later entry in the series, like maybe even a 3rd or 4th. And again, going back to arcs, Jake went from what was basically a mercenary into a warrior for the natives, but also as a leader. He learned to fight for the family that he chose versus what was in his blood, and in this movie, from a certain light, but I see it as pretty apparent, he starts off by putting the gun down. He's trying not to fight back at every instance, especially when he learns that specifically his family is being hunted down and other people are suffering for it. And by the end of the movie, he goes from that to learning that he should be fighting back instead of running away, also implying that he's learning to be a better father somehow within all of that. And this is someone who's treating his kids like soldiers for like the entire runtime, really. To me, it just comes off as a very bizarre and out of order timeline from someone who's just watching this objectively. But if you think Jake didn't have that much development, poor Neytiri, I feel really got the brunt of it. Especially it being 14 years later, I think she was just pushed aside more than anyone else here. Spider has something way more interesting going on than even Jake and Neytiri, or most of the other kids. She feels so unhinged in this movie, and not in a good way. Like, to me, her dialogue boiled down to one of two emotions. She's either incredibly vengeful or frustrated when arguing with Jake. There's like a sprinkle of affection between the two of them, but it's not that big of a focus. I just think it's more of a tragic downgrade for her character than it is with Jake, because to me, in the first movie, I took her to be a very passionate but much wiser and sensical compared to how she is in Way of Water. We only get crumbs with any bonding scenes between Jake and Neytiri with their kids, and even less so with Neytiri. And we use this as a way to talk about the rest of the family too. The acting from all of them are kind of a mixed bag. Spider, again, I think has the most interesting conflict going on between the rest of them, next to Kiri, but we'll touch on that in a second. But his acting, while I think leaves a lot to be desired, I think for a sequel is something that can be worked on, so it's not that egregious to me that he stuck out. He didn't ruin anything for me. Ironically, between the two oldest biological sons, Neytiri and Loak, are really unbalanced in their developments. Neytiri is the oldest, and given that he's the only one with the repeated flashback scene with him bonding with his dad, he's hardly focused on in this movie. The second main character in this movie is Loak. I'd argue this is more his movie than it is about Jake, which, you know, is fine, but that really comes at a cost when the big emotional pull of this movie comes after the death of Neytiri. And we don't get any major scenes related to him or either of his parents, minus that one fishing scene. His death rang really hollow. If anything, it would have made more sense to have Loak die, which I could see the reason for the twist in that not being the case. But hey, there's a twist there. I wasn't expecting that, so that's cool. But if they're gonna do that, then they should have set aside more time fleshing out Neytiri before his exit. Next to Spider, I do think Loak has a really interesting angle. He's trying to gain favor from his father, but also trying to find a place to fit in. And being the middle child, it makes sense, and for sure, it felt like he'd gotten the least amount of care and attention compared to the rest of the Sully family. Their youngest isn't really much of a character at this point, other than proving that she's really good at being kidnapped, like repeatedly. I mean, all the kids are pretty good at it. This movie is kidnapping galore, and it puts Taken to shame.
I won't forget what you've done for me here today.
I would prefer that you do.
Alright, let's talk about one of the more divisive figures of this movie, and that's its antagonist, Quaritch, which first of all, I don't think hardly anyone remembered his name from the first movie. I mean, why would we? I think we all naturally assumed he wouldn't be in the sequel because, you know, he literally gets shot to death, and also his name is just fucking stupid. But through the miracle plot armor device of cloning, our baddie is revived and upgraded with a new avatar body, along with the rest of his squad. Now, do I have a problem with Quaritch being in this movie? No, not at all. Mr. Big Time Cameron is the master of the box office, what the hell would I know? But do I think he was pulled off well enough when it came to writing and dialogue? A mixed bag. I'll admit that his setup, all the way until Jake and him meet for their rematch, presented a really interesting arc, or at least maybe the start to one potentially, because I love the fact that once he gets a hold of Spider, that him and his son not only have a lot of exchanges together on their journey, but they lightly tread over the same rituals that Jake had to go through for him to be acclimated to Pandora. From learning the language to taming a banshee of his own, there's a surprising amount of development going on for Quaritch. And even if they don't like each other as much as you'd think for father and son to be, there's definitely a lot of attempts made for him and Spider to become better acquainted. It worked enough for me that by the end, I don't feel that Spider's decision to save him was entirely out of the blue. No pun intended. It's confusing, sure, especially since he does that but still stays with the Sully's family, knowing that his dad will be coming after them all. That part doesn't make sense, but contrasted with Jake and his kids, I mean, I felt more of a connection going on with Quaritch and his son than with the Sullys. So the upside to this is that I'm actually looking forward to seeing where this villain ends up, because I really think there could be a chance where, I don't know, maybe he turns around and even joins like a Na'vi in a tribe, especially if the next one's a fire-based one. I could see him like joining that. That's totally within the cards. And I could be completely off, but to set up a villain this way and make him a little more sympathetic with his desire to still protect his son after all that they've been through and done to each other, that's kind of sweet. He's trying. He's a piece of shit, but he's still trying. A lot of my critiques on the plot stem from the characters. The decisions they made, from the time skips to the unbalanced character building between all the Sullys and side characters, because another element to this plot is the world building. There's a huge chunk of time dedicated to the Sully family learning about the environment of their new home. Now that I really liked. That entire sequence where they're learning how to hold their breaths, to bonding with the new sea banshees, and then the subplot-ish about the whales, all of that, great. I liked it all. In concept. Let me explain. The pacing to this movie until the final battle is an absolute slog. For context, first time I watched this was with my brother, and he walked out after less than 30 minutes of the movie. Not throwing shade at you, dude, just I don't blame you. I wanted to as well. My first viewing took 2 sittings. Based on that too, I'm glad that I didn't go to the theater because I probably would have really ended up hating it, having to sit through it all in one sitting on my first go. But remember what I said about the first movie being such an experience that I'm happy to take it in without paying much attention to the plot. Way of Water was the polar opposite. The world building is like maybe 30% of this movie, while the rest is the main plot stuff and all that. I did not connect with. And as much as I love that they set aside such a big portion of this movie to a world building set piece, it does not help with its pacing at all. Now, why do I have a problem with that sequence in the sequel and not in the first? And it's the pacing, and really the editing. So, the first movie, we are exploring Pandora through Jake. He's the boat on our tour ride, but it's not all at once. They sprinkle in bits and pieces of what Pandora is like from the initial setup, and then gradually grows to the point where by the end, now we are fully immersed and have a foundational understanding of this section in the world of Pandora. They don't show all their cards at once, and not all at the same time. In Way of Water, it's like they took all of that world building and crammed it into one act, and then is barely referenced again for the rest of the movie. For me, going from one plot beat to the next took a lot for me to sit through, because again, I didn't connect with many of the characters except for, ironically, the villain and Loak. Yeah, him too. I think he's alright. And I wasn't completely connected to Jake in the first movie either, but a lot of the side characters around Sully in Avatar 1 I think just have much more interesting motivations going on. Grace from the first movie is a good example of that. Her trying to get a better grasp and understanding on, I don't know if it's just the Omatakaya, but just like the whole AOR religion, all of that, and how the Tree of Souls operates and how that connects with their environment. She captured that wonder that I had when watching the film. And that's not really in Way of Water. It feels like everyone is adjusted to the surroundings, like nothing really gives them a revelation on a new understanding on how the world works. It's not completely devoid of that, but I find it to be a disappointing change compared to how effective that element was in the first movie. But in this one, we have Kiri, who's voiced by the same actress as Grace, and that's, legendary Sigourney Weaver. She's badass, I love her. But her being 73 playing a 14-year-old, not super noticeable most of the time. If you're not paying attention, but you can definitely like hear it. It's like, okay, some of the lines she says just kind of, they sound odd. I don't know what else to say. It was odd. Some of the lines she says where I'm imagining like a 14-year-old trying to say, like 73-year-old trying to say that, but coming from 14-year-olds, it's just weird. To me, I don't think it fits all that well, but Kiri's angle in this movie should be one of the most engrossing subplots here, and it is, but we just hardly touch on that at all. Like, Kiri has this incredible bond with the environments in Pandora, an obvious parallel to a connection, something more divine than what the Sullys or the Na'vi people can really fathom, and I really hope they continue with that and maybe focus on that element more in the sequels, because it's very confusing, but I'd love to know more. She, can control nature herself, and it's one of the few times next to Sully, I guess, from the first movie where we see someone actually manipulate nature or just have a superpower. I think that's kind of I wonder if there's other avatars out there who have a similar connection, or maybe because Kiri, alright, whatever, I'm just rambling, shut up. I'd love to know why and what all that means, and I pray they don't sum it up to be like how they did in this movie, where it's like it's a symptom of epilepsy. I don't think they're just gonna stop there, but if they do, oh my god, that'd be such a waste. Last point, soundtrack. The original composer for Avatar 2009, the GOAT, James Horner, unfortunately passed away back in 2015, and it's kind of noticeable for me here. They reuse some of the same melodies and themes from the first movie, but this has a very different feel to it. And again, it's not bad, but just the music itself and the way it's implemented in the movie back in 2009, I felt had more of a role in shaping Pandora as a world with its own cultures. But I really like Neytiri's song about their firstborn in this. Listen to the song chord, it's chilling. Using that track to start and then bookend the movie, both having different contexts, was a really nice touch. And after sitting through this 3-hour-long slog, that track was so nice. It felt like its own reward for sitting through this movie. And I just wish they played around more with music like that, among everything else. Because besides that, and the reused themes in the first movie, the score to me isn't super memorable. There's 1 or 2 tracks, but there's one track in here with The Weeknd. I don't really understand that, but that's, it is what it is. Avatar, The Way of Water, the 14-year-long awaited sequel to the highest grossing movie of all time. I don't completely hate it, but it doesn't sit that great for me. If I wasn't so enthralled with the sublime visuals and solid action sequences, I don't think I could have stomached going through this movie again, and I don't know if I really want to in general again. And if I do, it'll be like that documentary segment I was talking about earlier. I don't care to revisit most of the other characters again, sorry. Let's hope it's a little tighter next time around, but seeing that Cameron wrote all of these scripts back to back, I don't know. We'll see. I'm keeping my expectations to a minimum now, except for the visual effects. That I'll be there for that. So in my book, Avatar: The Way of Water gets 2 stars out of 5. And yes, even if I like the visuals more in this one, that's not enough for me to ignore all the other glaring problems, especially with its writing. But even after saying that, I do think it's worth watching if it's just for one viewing. If you can manage that, just one watch. I think it deserves that much at least. There's a lot of work that went into this. Because again, for me, the ocean is just like one of the most like beautiful pieces of nature like that we have. And I wish I could live by the ocean. But I'm glad that was the setting for this, and visually amazing, but story-wise, really boring, really dumb, and really glaring. And I would be okay with that if it just didn't stick out as much. I don't know. It's too dumb. Is that my assessment of this? It's too dumb. Well written. Good job. That's awesome. That sounds like a very mature answer. Alright, but that's the video. Thank you, dudes and any dudettes, for everything. Seriously, I don't know what else to say because I can't express it well enough into words. Next video, I'm really looking forward to, so let me do some explaining. Last week I was behind, no upload. This one, I hope this one comes out this week, I pray to God. But the reason that being is that I have just been on this really interesting journey of like marathoning The Last of Us game, the first one, the show, and I just finished the second one right now, and I think it'd be a really fun hybrid show slash game review discussion about the plot and basically my impression from it, because especially leading into the second game, I think it'd be really fun to talk about because I do have a lot to say, especially that show and comparing the two between the first game and the TV show. So yeah, I finished the sequel, and just that alone, yeah, I get it. I understood. I didn't understand the fascination of like, or the divisive opinions on it at the time. I knew what happened. I was like, okay, that does sound dumb. But actually playing it, I was like, divisive, but I got some stuff to say. So I'll save that for later. I'll be focusing more on the plot than the gameplay, but I might touch on that a little bit too. I'm not a game review channel, but games are also a huge part of my life too, and I have a big attraction to story-heavy games as well. And this project, I think, will be a nice blend of the two. But I got nothing else to say, so again, thank you all you new subs. I can't believe... See, I've had to rewrite this a couple times because I just keep getting more subscribers, and it's really nice. I'm like flattered. So originally I have like, I can't believe I'm almost at 70, but I just hit 80 like right now. So thank you. My God. All right. Not to mention, the view counts have been going higher, which is really nice. It's motivation for me. It's not the only goal, but it's really nice for me because it's like, it's just nice to compare progress from now to just a couple months ago. It's slow, but it's at a right pace for me because I'm still trying to get used to editing and all that. Rambling, and all of you guys that comment, thank you. Seriously, trust me. If I haven't responded, I'm still reading them all. Good and bad, I don't care. I'm just happy someone's taking the time to click on my little character here, and he appreciates you too. So from the both of us, thank you and take care. I'll see you guys maybe next week or this week. I don't think it'll be this week. Next week.